Mr. Chair.
Jacinda Ardern on
Mr.
part
Chair,
one.
I've got many questions for the Minister, the first of which I would like him to address at the end of my speech is how he would be any different to Paul Foster-Bell standing in Wellington Central in terms of his ability to take on Grant Robertson. But, Mr. Chair, we've had this incredible suggestion for some time now from the Minister of Arts, Culture and Heritage that we have somehow moved into this golden age of the arts under his leadership. Now, the question I have for the Minister is how many members of the arts community have taken on this mantra that he has proclaimed from his lofty office, that we are in the golden age of the arts? How many have accepted that hashtag on Twitter other than comedians, of course, who found it extremely witty, or perhaps writers of fiction who used it as a motif for the tired and the delusional? The golden age of the arts I have heard quoted twice, once by Minister Finlayson and once by Paul Foster-Bell at a debate at Warehouse last week. And, Mr. Speaker, I am yet to see the evidence of the golden age for the arts. In fact, I think what we're seeing is a sad state of affairs where Minister Finlayson is yet to acknowledge that the golden age was indeed under Helen Clark in the arts. And he has been living bitterly in the shadow of that period for some time. Now, he has tried to battle his way and carve out his own legacy. He has tried by focusing on the things he loves himself. He still thinks that CNZ stands for Chris, and rather than Creative New Zealand. And as a result of the fact that he can't battle his way out from under the shadow of Helen Clark's legacy in the art, he lashes out angrily at opposition members and just cannot cope with the fact that we've chosen to give arts the rightful place it deserves and acknowledges that in arts, culture and heritage there are a range of issues. We want to give them due credit and time, and we're unashamed about the fact that we have 3 members who are willing to take on that challenge. Right. Absolutely unashamed. But, Mr. Speaker, when it comes to the golden age of the arts, I do think perhaps it's time to acknowledge that, in fact, we're in an ice age for the arts. Perhaps Minister Finlayson thinks it's gold, but it's in fact a lemon snow cone. And when it comes to the Arts Council, Mr. Chair, we are, I think, seeing the equivalent of the super city approach being applied to the Arts Council. I would loathe to liken Chris Finlayson to Rodney Hyde, but the idea that you replace 4 bodies with a single board, you call it efficient, you call it empowering to people, you say you're reducing bureaucracy, but how does actually just simply lessening the number of people who represent important groups like Māori and Pacifica individuals, how does that in and of itself reduce bureaucracy? Now, if the Minister stood up and actually referred to what my colleague talked about, including the mountains of bureaucracy, which we have to acknowledge, arts organisations do have to battle through every time they make a funding application, that would be something else. But all that Minister Finlayson referred to was simply a loss of numbers. Now, Mr. Speaker, I want to come specifically to concerns that were raised by submitters, and in fact concerns that weren't raised by submitters. Now, we have to acknowledge that when it comes to issues like this, you won't always get people giving their frank view transparently at a select committee process for concern over what might happen to their own individual funding. Now, I don't blame them for that. When you have a minister who makes references to clauses in a bill with uses of the word like lasers and who calls Dame Anne Salmon names, you would be a little bit worried about the form of retaliation that you might get from a minister like that. We may not have even got to the bottom of people's concerns about this bill at Select Committee. But speaking specifically to what's happening to, for instance, Te Aotearoa and their reduction of representation, the Minister tried to claim that they would still have the ability to input. They could, for instance, rename a committee of the Arts Council. He flippantly said in the second reading speech, I believe, that we could just rename a committee of the Arts Council to Aotearoa and we would still have the same thing. We won't. We absolutely won't, because, Mr. Chair, under Clause 11 of Part 1, and specifically states that whilst the Arts Council, Mr Chair, whilst the Arts Council can establish a committee themselves, which could obviously make up members as they would then choose, the functions are very specific, and it's set out in Clause 11, Section 2, which states the function of that committee are A, to give advice to the Arts Council on matters relevant to the functions of the Council in relation to Māori arts, and B, any other functions that the Arts Council delegates to the committee. So my question to the Minister is very specific. Advice is what they are legislated to provide. Could the Arts Council delegate to a committee powers around funding? Is it possible for the Arts Council to delegate to a committee the ability to make funding decisions? Now, if they can do that, why was it not put specifically in the primary legislation? Why did the Minister not stipulate that? Because then we know that we could have established a replica body that is in line with Te Waka Toi. Now, if it wasn't stipulated specifically, is that because the Minister doesn't want them to make funding decisions? So I think we need some clear ministerial guidance from the Minister as to whether he wants committees of the Arts Council to make funding decisions. If he does not, now is his opportunity to state that. If he doesn't mind, then I would implore any future Arts Council to take heed of the fact that the Minister has no issue with that happening, and then perhaps he may well be correct that they have the power to set up an equivalent of what we currently have. Then I would question what in fact would be any different than what we have now. But it would be interesting to hear from the Minister in that regard. Mr Speaker, I want to come back to another element of Part 1, and that is Clause 8, the restriction on ministerial direction. Now, the reason I want to ask a question here is because what's become very clear under this Minister since he's been in charge of arts, culture and heritage is he has some very specific areas of interest. The arts community is under no illusion that there are only particular areas the Minister has any interest in being a patron of or showing any interest, attending, engaging with. Now, I don't say that because he's implied it or being subtle about it. He's actually said it. He's actually told people, don't bother inviting me, I will not come. Now, at least he's been clear. I think his guides sit generally around, we know he's a great supporter of the symphony orchestra. I believe he has an interest in the ballet. But beyond that, it gets a little more patchy in terms of his engagement. Now, Mr Speaker, the reason I'm raising this is because the Minister heralded the fact that under these changes there would be no requirement for the Arts Council to set out a strategic plan that would be published and shared, a 3-year plan. Now, the fear that I have, Mr Chair, is that therefore means that we could have an Arts Council that is very much dictated by the whim of the Minister. Now, he may claim that Clause 8 stops that from happening. Clause 8 says the Minister may not give a direction to the Arts Council in relation to cultural matters. Why does it not stipulate that he can't give a direction in relation to funding matters? And I'd be really interested to hear from the Minister in that regard, because I would say that there's probably a bit of a concern amongst the arts community, given his very specific areas of interest. And I recall that the review of the structure of the orchestras in New Zealand, that he may have made a statement that said, over his dead body would funding for those organisations be touched. Well, why are there no restriction on ministerial direction to the Arts Council more broadly when it comes to funding? Is it over his dead body for every single sector of the arts community, or just the ones he really, really likes? I try not to talk about corpses too often in my contributions in the House, even in reference to Minister Finlayson. So, I would like some specific feedback from the Minister in that regard also. And I do want to be clear. Although I've referred to Aotearoa, I don't want to forget, of course, that the same fate has been met by the South Pacific Arts Committee, and I'd like answers there as well.
That was a very disappointing inaugural contribution.